Hi, it's Joy Foster, your host of the Sparkle and Thrive podcast and also the founder of Tech Pixies. And today, as always, I have some amazing guests, but this one is particularly special to me for lots of different reasons. We've worked together for a long time, and she's done several of the programs at Tech Pixies, and I've just watched her go from strength to strength. She's overcome incredible amounts of adversity in order to really reinvent herself as a healer and is doing some incredible work in the world with children, in particular, helping them to get a great start in life. And I thought her story would be one that you would cherish as much as I do. So, Jo Fentiman, welcome to the podcast. I'm so glad you're here. Tell us your story.
Oh, right. Okay. So where to begin, really? I spent 30 years. Well, I've always done office work. I spent 30 years in the corporate world until my job was made redundant in 2015. We knew it was on the cards. We'd kind of known for 6 months, but it was still a massive shock when it happened because I was 52 when it happened. So I'd, envisaged that I would still be there until retirement. Unfortunately, the year before, I'd lost my dad to vascular dementia. My mum died 3 weeks after my job was made redundant. She'd had heart failure for a few years and kind of come to the end of that. We were moving house because we were moving in with her to support her. So that still went through. And, I think it was a perfect storm, really, of just too many highly stressful events because I was in the middle of the menopause as well. And I basically just had a really bad breakdown and I couldn't work for 14 months. I mean, I've always suffered with my mental health, ever since I was a child, and I manage it with medication and other things. But at that time, I'd also decided to stupidly take a break from my medication. So everything just imploded. But, eventually I came out the other side, had a few temporary jobs. Then I went to work for my local branch of CAMS, which was um, an area that I chose to work in because when my daughter had been at senior school, one of her friends had suffered from anorexia, and we used to visit her at an inpatient unit. And it just got me thinking, this is the kind of environment that I'd like to work for because of my experience with my mental health and just helping others. So I chose to work for CAMS, but unfortunately, a new boss came on board and just started, bullying me around my performance at work. And, if I thought kind of what I'd experienced in the corporate world was kind of bad enough, then the NHS was just a whole different ball game. The environment, the management was just very toxic. I mean, the therapists were just absolutely wonderful, but I couldn't believe the turnover of staff. I mean, it was just insane. But I mean, it's not rocket science. If you don't treat people well, they're not going to stay. And I wasn't the only one that he was treating like that. And eventually I just got to the point where I kind of thought I can't do this anymore. But one of the saving graces actually during that experience was that I signed up for free 4 coaching sessions. And the lady that coached me, it was just amazing. I mean, just over the course of 4 sessions, it was the first time that somebody got me to look at my values. And she just turned everything around. And kind of while this was going on, I was doing my Reiki training. I mean, I'd been having treatments probably myself since about 2005, never ever thinking that, that's what I would end up doing. But this was just kind of running parallel, and the coaching sessions just kind of made me realize, well, perhaps this is a sign. Perhaps this is what I should be doing. So I left there in March 2020 to launch my business, but then obviously COVID happened. So I had to put that on the back burner. But then that was a time when I joined Tech Pixies, and the community, I mean, you just being so accessible and just welcoming and supportive, just kind of really helped me, I think, because I've left so many jobs since I was made redundant because for one reason or another, I just haven't felt that they were right for me. And, always wanting to start my own business. So anyway, I had to put that on the back burner until the end of 2021, where I was doing another temporary job in a well-known retailer, and they, like lots of these companies, they just push you and push you and want you to do more and more for less. And there again, I just got to the point where I thought, I can't do this. I was 58, I think, at that time, and I just kind of thought with my business, it's now or never. So that's when I kind of took the final leap, and that's what I've been focusing on ever since then. So it's been a real roller coaster. I would say that my 50s were definitely the most tumultuous decade. I experienced the very worst, but I also experienced the very best, I think, in terms of, you know, um, accepting who I am, what really matters to me, and, what I want to do with the rest of my life. And, I'm very caring, sensitive, empathetic person. So the Reiki it's just a perfect fit for me, to help others and to help children with their mental health as well.
Yeah. Wow. Well, I mean, anyone that was listening to that story, there's probably so many parts of that story they can relate to. I think, you've tackled losing both of your parents. You've tackled losing jobs. You've tackled workplace bullying. You've tackled wanting to launch a business and getting hit with COVID in terms of, how the environment made it difficult to launch a new business, especially one that, you can do Reiki through Zoom, but also does well, when you're in person. There's so much to unpack. What do you think? I mean, I really want to talk about the business and some of the things that you did to get that off the ground, because I just love that story. And I think that's very valuable for people. But before we go there, what I'd really love to do is just talk about workplace bullying for a moment, because, you've experienced it on multiple levels and in multiple workplace environments. And it's something that no one really was talking about until recently. I feel like, those of us who've been in the workplace for anywhere from 20 to 40 years, that wasn't a conversation 20 years ago or even 10 years ago. It's just something that's now coming out. And we have actually several tech pixies who, originally when Tech Pixie started, it was to help women go back to work after career break. And the most common reason that people took a career break was looking after children. And then the second most common reason was they were looking after elderly parents, right? And then the third most common reason was they had breast cancer and they had to take a break from work because of cancer. And then we found that mental health was really the fourth major reason why people were leaving work. And now, of course, in 2023, we know that 1 in 10 women leave the workplace because of menopause. And they're not getting the support there. And of course, that's a whole new conversation that's just literally starting to happen in the last 3 years that didn't exist before as well. So I think, and if I go all the way back to where I think some of these conversations came into the world, I would argue that social media changed the game in terms of conversations about race, about diversity, about inclusion, about equality, but also about workplace bullying, menopause. Suddenly you have a platform where people can talk about whatever they want and it's not controlled. And you get the good with the bad. But what I find really fascinating, And one of the reasons that I love teaching social media from that perspective is used for good, it can become a source for good. And I think helping people to navigate workplace bullying, helping people to navigate grief, helping people to realize they're not alone, that there's a tribe of people that they can be a part of, or a group of people that they can be a part of, uh, is so important. So let's just talk about workplace bullying for a moment. What were some of the signs that you knew that you were being bullied, and then you I don't know how much you can talk about it or not talk about it, but at one point in one of your positions, you were able to go through a process which was very difficult and challenging, but that process was sort of facing the bully really and dealing with the challenges. Are you able to talk about that at
Yeah,
all?
I mean, I think, the first sign was kind of I'd been there, um, 6 months, he'd been there 3 months, and he just called me into just, a one-to-one meeting with him and just kind of said, "Well, how do you think you're doing?" And I kinda said, "Well, um, I feel like I'm doing okay." Um But one of the first things that he said was that I don't feel you're, working across the department." He just started picking everything apart, and what I hated was that these meetings, he'd suddenly spring them on me. There was never anything recorded. There was never anyone else in attendance. And when I'm in that situation, I kind of shut down and freeze. So I couldn't really take in what he was telling me. Um, and, kind of as soon as we had that conversation, I just kind of thought, oh my God, this is kind of happening again, because after leaving corporate, I'd worked for an old neighbour for 3 months, and he didn't extend the probation, and I just felt like these same things were coming up again and again, and it just eroded my confidence, and it just made me feel that, I mean, I spent 30 years in corporate. Before that, I'd spent 4 years at the BBC, and, my mental health has always affected my performance to a certain extent, but I was always reluctant to talk about it because of prejudice and rejection. And so, this new boss had no idea about my mental health because I chose not to be open about it then. Um, but within a few months, I was put on this thing called an informal capability process, where we would meet on a regular basis, we would look at objectives, but there again, nothing was written down.
Wow.
HR was never in attendance, and
Wow.
every time I would be in these meetings, I would just freeze, so I wasn't really taking anything in. I mean, it was a very stressful environment. In hindsight, it probably wasn't a good fit for
But
me.
what's interesting to me is about what you've just said, and I think this is important for a woman who might be listening to this who's getting bullied in the workplace. So, number one, the physiological reaction you had in the meeting, which meant you were freezing and you couldn't take in what was happening, and you also couldn't respond to it because you were in DEFCON, effectively, is what we call
Yeah.
it, at Tech Pixies. But it's that sort of fight flight chemicals hitting at the same time, and you just freeze. But the second thing that you said was there was no recording of this. HR wasn't present. You were always by yourself. And I think so. The key point here, which I think is important, is that if someone is experiencing what you were experiencing, that they need to speak up to HR. They need to have a representative with them. They need to make sure these meetings are recorded. And you might not think that in the moment, but actually afterwards, upon reflection, this is and the gift Joe's giving you today. And see, I never, you never wish someone goes through something as hard and horrible as you've gone through. However, one of the things we talk about at Tech Pixies are the 3 levels of gratitude, right? I'll be grateful when I'll be grateful when this is all over, right? Or I'm grateful for, the roof over my head, or my friends and family. But then there's another level of gratitude, which is sort of the highest vibration of gratitude, and that's grateful in. And so I look at this moment and I say, I wish that never happened to you. But the gift of it happening to you is you became a healer. And not only that, but you are helping other people heal from the challenges that they're facing, some in very similar situations. But then now here's an opportunity to educate women who might be feeling the way you're feeling, but not know how to deal with it. So that would be, it sounds like one thing is obviously notice what you're noticing, pay attention to how you're feeling in these meetings. And if you are freezing, because in the moment you're not going to be able to do much when you're freezing, but on reflection, if you're in these meetings, you're getting criticized all the time, and there's no praise, no positive praise, and it goes straight into all the things you've done wrong, and that happens on a regular basis. That's where, and there's no one there present, there's no recording of it, and you feel like you're freezing. It's a really good opportunity to then have a conversation with HR and get some support. And and tell us what you're able to tell us, but in terms of when you finally, because this had happened a couple times, but then you finally sort of put your foot down and said, this isn't right. And, what gave you the courage to do that?
Well, I think, I mean, kind of the thinking in my head had been going on for months, about leaving, um, because I quite often used to say to my husband, surely going to work shouldn't be this difficult. Because it was just an ongoing situation. And I think, one of the things with me is sometimes that I put up with stuff for a lot longer perhaps than other people would. But do you know what? I don't regret that time there, because it was my first experience of working in a clinical environment. It really opened my eyes up to the epidemic of children's anxiety. I worked with some wonderful therapists, and I wouldn't have had any of that insight had I not been there. So, I'm grateful for that. You know, I mean, when I left, I did start to take it down the tribunal process because my case was accepted. But then I kind of decided against it because it would have been very hard to prove. I should have been documenting a lot of stuff when I was there. And because I was like a rabbit in the headlights, I didn't.
So
And then,
that's actually another top tip if someone is being bullied,
yeah,
to
to
start
document
documenting what's being
it.
said, when it's said, what's happening.
Yeah.
Yeah, because
I mean,
without
he
documentation,
he
it's very
he
difficult.
kept saying to me, about all the mistakes I was making, but he never showed me anything. It was like he'd always kind of got the ultimate power, and it felt like the harder I tried, the worse it got. So, yeah, I mean, as I say, I decide, because I was on what was called the informal capability process, and you can take it to the next level, which is the formal, because this informal process was supposed to last 3 months, but it lasted a year,
Wow.
and it just kept going on and going on. And so we had a conversation, and I said, I want to take it to the next step, because, ultimately I knew that they were looking to get rid of me, because
Mm.
that is what would have happened. But even when I decided to go on this, the formal process, there was still no communication from anyone. I mean, I confided in some of the people that I work with, because if you're going through something like that, you have to have people in your corner. Um, but yeah, it was just, well, kind of unbelievable, really. But another internal vacancy came up, and I kind of thought, well, I'm going to go for this. If I get it, I'm out of this department. But if I don't get it, I'm leaving anyway. And I did go for the interview, and I knew that it wasn't going to be a good fit, and I didn't get it anyway. And I thought, do you know what? I just need to leave this place for my own
Yeah.
sanity. And that's why I kind of dropped the case as well with the tribunal, because I thought I'd have to face him again. And for my own sanity, I just needed to walk away from it. But, I was only there for 2 years, but it kind of took me a year to get over it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's go back to the child. the little girl Jo, because one of the things that you said is you got an eye open, a real wide eye view of what it's like to work with a child with anxiety in this role, which you wouldn't wish the experience on anyone, but the what you gained in knowledge was instrumental in what you're doing now. Um, do you recognize that child in yourself?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And one of the very rewarding elements of my Reiki is that I offer it to teenagers, teenage girls with anxiety. And it's just so rewarding to see the difference. There was one particular young lady that I started working with before Christmas. And over the few months that we worked together, just to see her confidence growing and just knowing that I could do something that really helped her. Because, the wonderful thing about Reiki is that it calms the nervous system, and it's just so soothing and healing, and children and young people react and respond so well to it. It's just a really soothing space for them, and I just find that
Mm,
really rewarding because I'm very sensitive, I'm very empathetic, I'm very caring, I'm very kind, sometimes probably to my detriment, but that's kind of the ethos of my business, and I just want to give other people what I didn't have always.
yeah. If you're willing to share, and you might not be willing, and up to you. One of the things we do at Tech Pixies is we help rewire the subconscious. We help rewrite the story.
Yeah.
Um, I've never forgotten a call we had where we worked through one of the challenges that you had as a child. Um, do you feel comfortable talking about it? If you don't, we can move on to
Yeah,
other
no, of
things.
course.
But
Yeah,
I
yeah.
think it's important for people to hear that story. So, in your own words, however you want to tell it.
Um, well, I kind of think, what it's important to say as well is that my parents in the 50s experienced 2 stillbirths within 4 years, and my sister was a live birth in between, and I was a complete accident. And back in those days, it wasn't discussed. They probably didn't even have a death certificate. There was no memorial service. There was just nothing. They were just told to get on with their lives and try again. But I mean, to go through one must be traumatic. But when, the consultant has said to my mum, this won't happen again, and of course it did. I
Mm,
mean, with the first one, she didn't even get to hold it. And I think the legacy of this is, I mean, I knew about this situation, but I think I just absorbed a lot of anxiety, and I've read a lot about intergenerational trauma. And
yeah.
I think that is kind of at the root of kind of all of my problems, really, in a way. That's kind of the beginning of it all. Um, So yeah, and I had a very close relationship with my mum, but my dad was very much the Victorian father. Children should be seen, not heard. So there was no physical affection whatsoever. And I think me being so sensitive, I just absorbed all of that. And I really think, from everything that I've read, because there's so much research out there now about it, and it's really interesting. And I just feel that that's kind of, you know, the basis for everything that I've been through, that I think my foundations weren't secure. It's all to do with attachment. And I think, there's just so much trauma there. How could it not leave a lasting legacy on a family?
And yet it has not stopped you, which is why I think you're extraordinary in the
No, well,
thing.
I think, I in families, I have read where the kind of the pattern continues and some in until somebody's ready to kind of face it.
Mm.
And for years and years and years, I just couldn't understand why my anxiety and depression and stuff was so bad, because there was an element of me that felt like I was grieving for something, but I didn't know what. But it all makes perfect sense, doesn't it? I mean, I always had so much anxiety about having my own children. And it's only in the last few years that I've realized, well, of course, why wouldn't you?
Yeah, it's
Why wouldn't
epigenetics, right?
you?
It's like she goes
Yeah.
through this anxiety that passes on to you in the womb, and then you go to have children. I mean, it absolutely. There's a lot of research and evidence to back up exactly what you just said. It's one of the reasons why now I'm doing the master's in applied neuroscience. Is really to understand the mental health and behavioral change that happens as a result of what's going on in the brain. And even in the very first lessons of my master's, like the very first lesson I had was on the nervous system. And it was about how the nervous system develops even within the first 4 weeks, and how, from a very, 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 early stage of development, there can be challenges that set people up for life with, on the autistic spectrum, but also, with schizophrenia and other things, just in the exposure to what's happening in the womb. So there is a lot of evidence to back up what you're saying, and a lot of scientific research into it, and it's a real thing. And understanding how fear passes from one generation to another. There's a study that was done with mice, and they made mice afraid. Mice afraid of cherries. It was like cherry tree or something like that. The smell of it, and then for generations of mice after that, they had this fear of this smell, and so they're trying to unpack that and understand, how is it that, this one change you introduce, this fear you introduce in one generation affects multiple generations afterwards. But we have, and this is the other thing I learned. I mean, I've only 1 week in, but there's so much, and I don't have a scientific background, so it's been a real eye opener for me. But in the embryonic stage, we have pretty much the exact same makeup as almost all other many other animals, and so that's why they can do research on mice, and try and understand what's happening in humans. And whether you agree with it or don't agree with it, that study is really interesting, because it says a lot about the what could be going on with humans generationally, if a fear is introduced in one generation and that gets passed on in the womb. So you have this incredible story of overcoming everything that's come your way, and you leaned into healing as part of that. So you said you started getting Reiki therapy in 2005, and then you also became a mindfulness coach. And when you started working with Tech Pixies, you were deciding that you're going to do your own Reiki and mindfulness company. And there were all these steps, you have to do to get there, the branding and, the sign. And I mean, I have real vivid memories of you sharing your branding, of you sharing your sign outside, of your studio. It's a beautiful sign. But I also, you've been on the coaching calls for years, and and I've been on this. I feel like I've gone on this journey with you. And one of the things that you said, couple things. One, when you were looking for people to work with, you posted a post on Facebook. It got a whole bunch of responses, and so you were leveraging social media to connect with people. But the second thing that I thought was so interesting was when you did launch your mindfulness coaching. You had the room rented, you had it all set up. You go to show up, and then like nobody was there, and I just love your response to that. So tell us a little bit about the journey of, realizing I'm a healer, realizing I have these I'm an empath. I have these incredible gifts and talents that I need to use in the world to help teenagers and children in particular, to navigate anxiety. But what was it like setting everything up, sitting there and waiting for people to come, and then no one was there? What did you do? How
I
did you
think,
deal with that?
well, when it happens the first time, you kind of think, "Oh God, I'm a bit rubbish." But then I think thanks to, all the coaching that I've had from Tech Pixies, I just used the time I did a session as if there were people there. or I'd use the session to do other things. And I just, kind of realized it's a bit like, planting your garden. You sow all these different things, you plant all these different plants, and some just die straight away, and some do too well and kind of take over, and then you have others that are just kind of perfect. And it's time, isn't it? Like, it's not a sprint, it's a marathon. And I think also launching in, the economic downturn that, we've had over the last couple of years or what have you. But I think, when I think about my business from my heart space, then it feels, it feels absolutely, it's the correct fit, it's the right fit for me. It's just when you allow all those, the ego to find all the reasons why you shouldn't do something or why you should stop
Ants, the
something.
automatic negative thoughts that
Yeah.
crawl all over us. Um, well, what? So the coaching at Tech Pixies helped you to navigate that, and you just kept showing up. And
Yeah.
then I remember one of the wins. You're like, 4 people came.
Yeah.
That was so exciting. And so tell us now about your business, because your business is thriving and it's growing, and you've got you're doing
Okay, so
different things.
yeah,
You're trying different things.
I have some clients. I mean, kind of in the last sort of few months, things to seem to have been sort of dropped down a bit. But I think my confidence from the people that I have had and all the fantastic testimonials that I've had just really helped me to realize that, I'm good at this, I can make a difference, and that people really appreciate it. And it's just kind of tweaking it all the time, to kind of find out what works, and, connecting with your community, and perhaps finding people to collaborate with. It's just, yeah, you just have to keep going. I think if you believe in what you're doing, and, in an ideal world, if I won the lottery, I'd do this for free because I love it so much. But, at the end of the day, it's a business. But, there are some charities that I've reached out to. There's one actually called Aching Arms, which is in Hertfordshire and Essex, and that's a charity for stillbirth. So, I've connected with them, and I would really like to offer some Reiki sessions to parents, because Reiki, there's really not anything Reiki can't help with. It can help you through the process of grief. Yeah, it just helps with everything really. But yeah, it's just, um, living my purpose really.
Yeah. And living your purpose looks good on you. So, Jo, you've done both the Tech Pixies program, the social media program, and also Dream Builder. Do you have a favorite, or did you love them both?
Um, oh, I love them all. I mean, I've done a lot of different sort of courses over the year, and, you show up and you get the content, and then that's kind of it. But I think the fact that, you're so accessible, you're always there in front of, in front of the camera. And yeah, the coaching community, the Facebook group, it's just so supportive and kind. There's no, you because in some places a whole bunch of women, it could get quite bitchy, but there's just absolutely nothing like that. And that's why, I'm still here 3 years after I started the course.
Hmm. Well, what would you say to someone who's lost and needs support and help, and is not necessarily thinking that they deserve it, and really they should invest in moving themselves forward in a system of support?
Yeah,
What would you
just
say to them?
definitely invest in it, because I remember, I did the free boot camp, didn't I? And then I made quite an impulsive decision at the 11th hour to sign on to the actual course, because I knew if I didn't do it, I'd regret it.
Hmm.
That was the main thing for me. It's just the value, and yeah, I would have regretted it if I hadn't have done it.
Well, I am so glad you did. And I'm so glad that we're continuing to work with each other. And, you've got such an incredible gift to give this world. And I'm so grateful that you're doing that. Thank you so much today for making the time for us. And we know you've got to go because you've got a class you've got to teach.
I have. Yeah.
If,
Okay.
if someone wants to find out more about you, where can they do that?
Yeah, so I'm on Facebook and Instagram. Facebook is This Is Love _Reiki. Facebook is Love Reiki, and I've also got a website, lovereiki.com.
Lovereiki.com. Well, Jo, thank you so much. Have a wonderful
Oh,
rest of
thank
your
you,
day.
Joy.
All right. Oh, that was so wonderful. I am just so excited that I got to speak with Jo. Sometimes you have to wait for a story to tell it because people are going through it. And Jo's been going through this story for the last 3 years. And I wanted to wait until she was ready to tell the story, but I thought it was a really important story to tell. The more women I work with, and we've now at Tech Pixies worked with 13,000 women across the United Kingdom, and we've worked closely with 850 women. And when I say closely, I mean closely. I know many of them and their personal stories. It's not 850 women in 1 year; it's over the last 8 years. But I know many of them and their personal stories and their personal triumphs. And I think this is a perfect example of a personal triumph. Someone who it started out tough, and it's been tough for a long time, and now in her 60s she's blossoming and finding her way. And I'm grateful that we're a part of that. We're not responsible for it, but we're responsible to her to provide Jo and every other one of our students the opportunity to transform their lives through our training. But they got to do the work, right? And Jo showed up. Jo did the work. She leaned into really hard emotions and feelings and dealt with them. So listen, I know some of you are listening to this, and you may have lost a child, or you may have had a stillbirth, or you may have been raised in a family where there was that, but nobody talked about it. And it may have affected you the rest of your life. We'll put some resources in the show notes as to where you can get support. Because I think it's important when you listen to a podcast like this, that if you recognize that workplace bullying is happening to you, or you recognize some of the other things that Jo talked about, that you get support, whether that's through Tech Pixies or somewhere else, but that you get support, and that you don't sit without that support. It's very important. We're not meant to do this life alone. Desmond Tutu, who is my uber hero, if you will, he always said, people are people because of other people, Ubuntu. And I think it's really important that you seek support, whether that's with Tech Pixies or somewhere else. So we'll make sure that support and links to that support is in the show notes. And I want to just say a huge thank you to Jo for sharing her story. It's not easy to share a story like that. And I knew that there was going to be a lot of emotion in that story. So I'm really grateful to her. And I'm really grateful to the path she's now on, and all the lives that are going to be healed as a result. So if you're listening to this and you recognize you have a life's purpose, one of the things that I think we're really good at Tech Pixies is helping women find their purpose and lean into that and do it in a supportive environment. So if you're a purpose-driven woman, if you are a woman who wants to make the world a better place, you're a really good fit for Tech Pixies. So make sure you're reaching out to us to see how we can connect with you. Support at techpixies.com. And that's pretty much it for now. If you haven't already found out about our boot camp, we have a social media superhero boot camp. If you go to techpixies.com/bootcamp, you can find out more about it. That's the boot camp that Jo did that got her into our world. There's also a vision workshop that we run every month to help you get clarity on your vision, which Jo also did as she was building her business. So techpixies.com/vision workshop, and you'll find out about the latest and upcoming ones that are available to you. Bye for now.